I can declare the meeting open to the public and remind members that the meeting will be recorded, and ask members to note that all mobile phones must be switched off as they interfere with the recording. And would you please ensure that your phone is actually switched off, not just on silent or airplane mode? And can I also remind anyone in the public gallery that at this stage it's not permissible to bring any electronic devices into the public gallery. Can I remind you also to declare your interest as appropriate throughout the meeting? Thank you. Apologies from Mervyn Story, Robin Newton, Jonathan Craig. I think that's everyone, isn't it? No, okay. Chairperson's business. We members yesterday, the Chair, Trevor Lunn, Sean, Joanne Dobson and myself met with the representatives of Drumrar Integrated College to discuss the reported exclusion of the college from Lisnelly Shared Educational Campus in Omagh. A relevant paper is in tabled items. I suggest that we write to the Department seeking an update on the Lisnelly campus from Department of Education at our next Programme for Government update briefing, and the reason for the college's exclusion. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Yeah. I also suggest that following the judicial review judgment, which is expected tomorrow, that we consider this matter again at the subsequent meeting and perhaps seek clarity from the Department in respect of the development proposals at the briefing on the 4th of June 2014. Agreed?
Yes, I would just.
Yeah.
We're just going to ask the Department for the reason for the exclusion. I mean, is that exclusion already a firm decision that's been made, or is it just something that's been said by the Assistant Permanent Secretary?
I think that's what we need to find out, isn't it?
The outline business case says that they're out.
Come again, sir?
The outline business case for the Lisnelly campus says that Drumrar aren't included.
So the decision's been made in the business case that it's not part of it.
But does the outline business case even mention Drumrar?
Chair, for members' information, yes, it does. If you remember, we had a written briefing on it a while ago, it was a month or two ago. Look at the little pack that I gave members for our meeting with Drumrar. It actually refers to the schools that are involved, takes members through the options that were decided upon. So it would appear that that is the situation, but the committee is seeking an update. So we get regular updates on the Programme for Government, as the member knows. One of those Programme for Government commitments is Lisnelly. So what the Chair is saying is that the next time they come to tell us about Lisnelly, they tell us to explain the Drumrar situation.
Should we be turning it round then and asking the question of how can it be included?
Do you want to do
that?
Well, would that be a more positive way of doing it? Does that matter?
That's kind of where I'm going with it. I mean, I don't mind if we write to the Department and ask them to outline the reasons why they don't consider that Drumrar should be included in a shared campus, as long as we can revisit it subject to what they say.
But if we weren't even stronger and just said, well, then they look at options for how it can be included into the future, are we then going too strong?
Well, I don't know if it's the view of the whole committee, frankly, and you know what I think about it, but I got the impression yesterday from the ones who were there that there would have been strong support for the obvious decision that a major integrated school should be included in what's effectively a first step to integrated model. If the committee is content to go the way you say, Chairman, that's fine with me. You know.
Is the committee happy to go that way? I mean, at the moment they're left out of the plans for it, and they are asking if they can be included, and they were left out, it seems, purely for a building matter, in that they had got a new building, but they had to make their decision early before they even knew Lisnelly was going to happen, and the obvious thing to do was to go for the new building because theirs was dangerous and was failing health and safety. And it seems logical that an integrated school, which is the shining example of sharing, is included on the site. We'll have that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, therefore, I think we write to them stronger and saying, could they look at ways to include it?
Chair, I have no difficulty with that. I see no reason why we can't write and suggest that they be included if possible.
Okay. Yeah. And then that moves us on. I had gone through that. But, this was the judicial review. Just to remind us that comes out tomorrow, and that may knock on a whole lot of events. We'll take that up in the future, 4th of June. Okay. Next point, Chris. I'm told this is your final education meeting as a single man.
Yeah, it is indeed, yeah.
When I first read it, I thought we can't be losing you, but no. Anyway.
Sorry, I thought there for a minute I'd been moved now.
You didn't know about it. Yeah. Anyway, congratulations, and I hope everything goes really well and have a great future. Then move to the draft minutes of the previous meeting. The draft minutes of the 7th of May are at pages 95 to 100 in the pack. Are there any comments on the draft minutes? Okay, agreed.
Yep.
Matters arising? None. Okay. Right, if we can move on then to our first briefing, which is underachievement, and it's a non-departmental briefing for Dr. Ken Harland on taking boys seriously. Members, last June the committee noted the publication of a report of Taking Boys Seriously, a longitudinal study of adolescent school life experiences in Northern Ireland. And the committee agreed to invite the report authors, Dr. Ken Harland and Sam McCready, to provide a briefing on their findings. The clerk's cover note is at pages 103 to 109, and in your papers you'll find a PowerPoint summary of the report and a copy of the report. A RAISE paper from 2012 on underachievement has also been included for information. Witnesses have also forwarded a short DVD presentation to the clerk, which is available to members should they wish to view it. Okay, now if I could welcome Ken Harland.
Good morning.
Co-director of the Centre for Young Men's Studies, University of Ulster, and Mr. Sam McCready, co-director, also Centre for Young Men's Studies, University of Ulster. Very good to see you here today.
Good to be here. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. You've got 10 minutes, please,
Okay.
and then we'll have some questions.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a wee brief sort of overview. When we took this study on, it was really the Department of Education's concern around, what is happening with underachievement, and particularly what's happening with boys, and connecting to things that were social trends around suicide and things like that. So they give us, we convinced them of the need for a 5-year longitudinal study, and that's what they funded. And we came up with a very creative methodology in which we really got the heart of boys and boys' concerns and issues and the whole process and the transition through school for 5 years. So we called it Taking Boys Seriously because that's how we went about the task. We took boys seriously, and with a very creative methodology. And we worked in partnership with Youth Action Northern Ireland, and we actually went into classrooms and teaching. But a big part of it was listening to boys, and that there for us was a massive learning experience, and a big gap sometimes. And when you look at an analysis of underachievement, sometimes the voice of boys isn't there. So we had a case study as well of a successful school who had demonstrated through work a lot of achievement success as well. In the last year, we've been quite busy in terms of dissemination. This is about our 16th now, group that we've presented to and impacted at different levels out there. But that's helped our thinking as well. So the report, in some way, the main report, when you look at it, our thinking would have moved on from the report that came out in December 2012. We've also developed a partnership with the Regional Training Unit, and as a result of that, we've had access, for example, to 80 post-primary school principals, and as a result of that, people were coming to us and asking us to develop work further. And the DVD was actually connected to that there because people thought it was a very engaging way to work with staff and things. We've also developed some successful work in schools, just piloting, and there's one school in particular in Draperstown who actually adopted some of the practical things we were doing, and they've seen a lot of benefits just by doing practical things with boys, starting with conversations, talking to them and developing on from that. So when we look at the issue of underachievement, and there's a lot around at the minute, you know, around Protestant underachievement, whatever, I think the main thing to say there is that 4 out of 10 young people are not making the benchmark in GCSEs. So that's 40%. Now, Protestant boys don't represent the full 40%, so it's wider than that there. And there's other factors, such as, you know, social class, ethnicity, location, home life and all, which have to be taken into consideration as well. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of them wider things and latch onto one. So it's the big block of underachievement that needs addressed. That's the main thing. One of the key things of that is when you actually look at, well, who's underachieving, it's when you get into the bottom 20% of those who are most likely to be causing the most difficulty, socially and educationally and behaviourally as well. You see that that's almost over 80% boys. So it's that bottom block of the 20% of underachievers that maybe need the most focus. But we have this dichotomy, and clearly not all boys are underachieving by any means. And in Northern Ireland we have some very good statistics of people's success within education that we can be proud of. One of the things we did do was talk to boys, and out of that we got a lot of stuff. You can't deny the importance of a relationship. Where a boy had a strong relationship with a teacher, they liked school better, they liked the subject better, they thought they would do well and improve on from that there. One of the striking things from our research was, see, around year 10, there's a whole lowering of expectations. These boys wanted to be superheroes, they wanted to be lawyers, they wanted to be professionals at 11 and 12, and by the time they were 14, they're saying, I'll be lucky if I get a job, I'm not very smart. It's that type of thing. You could just say, and that was a very sad finding. Another strong finding was the whole disconnect with these boys. How these boys felt a disconnect with school, with subjects, with the reality of their lives, which is a massive thing. Because these boys, some of them were just sitting in the back of the room reading comics while the classes were going on, because they weren't doing the subjects, they had no engagement to that. So there was a total disconnect. But then when we started talking to these boys about their lives, then what we see is this disconnect to their community. That they didn't see their families connected to school, they didn't feel connected to adults. As a matter of fact, the older they got, the more alienated they felt from adults, decision-making processes, and in particular things like peace building. When we talked to them about that, there was no sense that we were part of a community or we're part of a society, and very vague about. So that was an interesting thing. But it sometimes was reflected in schools where there wasn't really processes where boys had a voice. How am I doing with time here? So some of the things that we've outlined there for you. We also spoke to head teachers about boys, and they did say clearly that a lot of what these boys are bringing have been there from primary school and maybe pre-primary school. But again, it's a bit like the Protestant boys. You just don't want to latch on, all right, get them early and that'll solve everything, because it'll not. And we know from our study that the very fact you go through adolescence will present a whole new range of issues. So it's complex, it's there, it hasn't gone away. Some of the statistics that we've presented have been there 15 years. Time-wise, what way are we at the minute? We're fine, keep going. So these teachers were saying they're raving with that. They began to notice gender differences between boys and girls as they spoke about that. There are boys presenting differently, boys wanting to be mommy, coming into school and wanting to be looked after and cared for, taking longer to settle and prepared. So, but although they spoke to us about that, there was no sort of awareness or gender awareness or anything gender specific that teachers could actually use to think about these issues. And that's where Sam and I really began to develop thinking, well, how can we help teachers to engage more effectively with boys, to address difficult issues with boys, to connect. And so rather than disconnect, how do we connect boys to their lives, to their school, their community? Because it's all one, and as we say, it takes a community to educate a child, and it's not about setting up a committee or getting a sector of education to respond. I think it needs to be what we call a holistic and a strategic and balanced approach.
Sam, do.
I suppose what I'd add at this stage, is just to reinforce what Ken said, through different disseminations. When you're in the individual schools, when you've got 80 principals before you, when you've got policymakers and others before you, your thinking matures. And often what we're saying, so what actually can work? And we'll be very keen to engage with you as to some of the ideas that we have in that. But some of the headlines from our research would say, so when you take what the boys say and you put together, experienced teachers, we come up with some, I think, important things. And we keep coming back to one very significant thing: the relationship that a boy or a child will have to his school and to his or her community are very important. And we talked about the 3 R's, but our 3 R's were about relationships, mutual respect, and giving them responsibility. Through 5 years of talking to the same boys as they progress each year, continually we heard that the importance of relationship. I mean, I'm a parent of two sons who went through something similar, and I can always remember my son coming in and saying, "I love history." Day one, he loved history. But when I asked and unpacked, he says, "Well, what the teacher told us to do was throw our books out the window." So his impression immediately was, this is a good subject because it was different. Now, the teacher did more than that, because what the teacher said to him, history's in this room. So immediately he identified with a teacher who was able to relate their subject to something that he felt was theirs. And that relationship was very crucial. And the second point that we would highlight is the boys' sense of, although we're talking generally here, but there was a sense of, well, we don't have a voice. We don't have a voice in our own community. We don't have a voice in our own school. So we all know the cliches about, identifying empowerment and feeling ownership with. But we did identify, without being critical of our schools, a lack of actually formal ways of listening to and taking on board the voice of young people in the school. In this case, our study was particularly around one boy. So having a voice and having that voice listened to, so some advising some schools and helping them to formally structure that, but to informally structure that. So when we talk now a couple of years beyond our study, and a principal said to us, what we did the other day as a result of listening to you is we actually formally asked boys what they thought. Now that sounds very simple. But one of the teachers then said to us, one of the boys who we understood we didn't have a relationship with, actually, when I asked him what was happening to him at the weekend, actually gave me a considered response. So the teacher then found that a very simple communication and asking affected, A, how he thought about that boy, and secondly, open up. So having a voice, I think, is a very fundamental issue about what can work in this situation. And so there are some very practical things around the school. Some of the deficits, and we're not here to knock teachers in a sense, but some of the teachers identified, to us and with us, they didn't quite understand what motivated boys. What was the motivation? And we explored that, and we looked at summer training. I think I know Sean's been a teacher in the past and a principal. Some of the teachers said, well, it wasn't really in our training. There wasn't anything gender-specific in our training. There was very generality about it. So we were sort of going, well, do we need to look at the training of teachers as something gender-specific, something around, motivation? What motivates a young 5- and 6-year-old is different from what motivates 11, 12, 13, 14. So understanding what motivates boys is very important. Our case study would point to very simple things. Our case study of a very successful all-boys school. Incentives. Boys like and need and prefer better boundaries, structures, rewards, physical activity, simple things about understanding young males, and therefore then having the school apply those would be important. Ken mentioned, it's not all about the schools, it's not all about teachers. It's the potential of parents as leverage. Now, that's easy to say, and we all know, and maybe again as parents around this room, I've been to every 3 months sitting in front of a teacher and getting feedback on my child. And with respect, some of the teachers think that's involving parents. And, simple things as we were saying to the teachers, well, why don't you run an evening on, call it young boys' adolescence, young male adolescence, rather than calling it parenting classes. Invite parents to come in and talk about understanding young male adolescents. So you're flipping it around, not trying to put pressure and critical of parents of being bad parents and saying, here's how you parent. You actually get parents in talking about understanding boys, because a consistency between school and home is one of the ingredients that helps. Yeah. So the boundaries that you might create in school need to be fairly consistent with the boundaries that are in the school and in home and in the community. So there is a reason why schools need to engage more readily, not just with parents but with the community. And sort of finally, in a sort of a what works, and there's loads of things that are related into here. One of the most significant indicators of success was prior achievement. So therefore, what was happening in primary schools was fairly consistent. And a lot of our head teachers were talking about what they inherited. Now, it's easy perhaps then for them to, let's blame the primary sector, and it's not necessarily about that. But prior achievement is usually a good indicator of, it's easier to turn them around whenever, some of the early interventions. So some focused early interventions that may start at nursery school. And again, we have a working relationship with a colleague in England who's developed what's called a standout boys approach, which is working very much in the 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old end of things. And Trevor Lloyd, who's also working with us with the RTU. So there's some of our headlines around what works. We would be keen to obviously respond to any questions you've got, but we have some ideas about what needs to happen in the classroom, what needs to happen in the school in general, what needs to happen in terms of engaging communities and having what we call this more balanced approach between the school, the community and other non-formal educators. So if that helps, Chair, that's our opening pitch.
Very, very good and phenomenally useful document, and yet sometimes I'm thinking that's so obvious.
Yes.
And yet, we're not necessarily taking it in anyway. I know Joanne's got to rush off to something, so before I come back, because I want to focus on your ideas in a second, but Joanne, if you would.
Thank you, Chair. Can I also thank you for your briefing, and there's certainly some great suggestions there already that you've brought forward. In your report, you suggest that boys are more likely to undertake less academic GCSE subjects, certainly changed from my day at school, where the boys tended to be pushed towards the sciences and the girls towards the languages. So, can you give us some examples of the subjects boys are more likely to choose and be led towards? And ultimately, how do you feel this will impact on their career paths? You've already outlined, and we all know the issues boys with higher literacy, numeracy and IT standards for the future, the impact of that.
One of the issues is if you're talking about Year 10 boys selecting the... this is what caused them a lot of problem. Because they're looking at a set of GCSEs saying, well, I have no chance. And they're going to go for what are more soft options. I mean, they would, you know that, John, they've had that drummed in them, and from maybe 10, 11, that they're not very smart, they're perceived as failures, which is a disgrace to any education system. Would label any child a failure, but they feel it. So they look at the option and they're going for it. And I think teachers also are under pressure because they know they want results and they don't want putting children forward into areas where they're not going to do well. So there is a dilemma there.
Mindsets are
yes,
established.
Yes, and when you include English and Maths into the GCSE, that's why we're getting such a... If you took that out, them statistics will go up. So we've set a target to beat ourselves with as well, just by the way we include that. But again, do you want an articulate workforce that you can't comprehend Maths and English? There's things to wrestle with there.
Do you feel they are very demotivated, and that's reflected on the subjects? And
the lowering of aspirations and the psychological well-being of our sample went like that in Year 10. Now, that has to be significant. I mean, what adolescents are saying to you there, this is a massive impact in my life. And the other thing is you can't change it. You can't even change it the other way. So if you're thinking, well, listen, I'm improving in this area, you can't. It's like concrete, really. It's there, and you make that decision. And I think a lot of young people don't realise the consequences of that.
Have you found, Ken, maybe a link between free school meals entitlement and the subject choices which boys make?
No, I can't answer that specific thing, but we know when you look at underachievement, that's massive as an indicator, and people are using that their statistic now for lots of reasons.
I think the research will always disadvantage attainment and life chances are clearly connected. Whether you go specific about how many preschool meals or free school meals actually perform. I mean, I'm interested in your question too, and we don't want to overstate. In our sample of 9 schools, included grammars, included secondary, and included geographically rural and urban. But it was very clear, first of all, my own example of my own son, the correlation between liking a subject and a teacher was very obvious. So that's an interesting,
I can think
where does that lead you?
adored my German teacher, and that
I am sure,
provoked me to do German for A-levels, so it does have a massive impact.
Again, I think the importance of, that's a tremendous responsibility to have in a teacher, and I think we have to look at how we train them and equip them, to relate, because, a lot of the boys, and one of the interesting findings, and Ken alluded to it earlier, was this observation in secondary school, how in the transition, that it was the boys that were taking longer to settle. And the phrase that repeated by a couple of them was, they just wanted mammied. So that, and all that was illustrating was that...
And held into the subject.
I'm going to get my mommy if I've got a problem. And then the transference, particularly in secondary schools, to, going to more female teachers and male teachers. So when we unpicked a lot of that with the teaching staff, that was an interesting about the lack of maturity with young boys. So again, the important thing, when those important decisions were being made, there was a lot going on in the boy's life. That isn't as simple to say, oh, it's to do with free school meals. Because the other, real deficit that we found in our schools, and I don't want to really be coming over as critical here, no one of them attended to growing up as a man. There was nothing in the curriculum. And when we got the boys in the room, and as we knew them each year, and we sat in rooms like this around the table and talking to them, and we asked them, there just wasn't, they were saying, well, nobody talks to us about things like that. I don't get it at home necessarily, some of them were saying. So growing up to be a man, and all that goes with that, and in certain societies, and the expectations. So when you come to say to making choices, some of them felt that responsibility. They still had the breadwinner, concept and mentality of mind for some of them. And others, so being helped to adjust to what was happening to your body. The expectations, of some communities where violence was very raw and in your face. How did they adjust to that? So there was a lot of responsibility on schools where boys expected that to be attended to, and when it doesn't, that's another factor when you're coming to choose subjects. You choose safely. You choose not necessarily, geared to, well, I'm going to university and I therefore must do that. Some of it was very practical.
Okay.
And just
Can I just think of one point? With boys who were maybe struggling in school, what they said they benefited most from was when they were doing a subject, skills, practical skills and knowledge, where some of the subjects are just pure knowledge based, where they were saying if they get practical skills, that they were more inclined to go for that then, something that they could actually physically say, I can do something now.
Just a final wee supplement for me. Have you any evidence to suggest that pupils attending more recently built and better resources school buildings may have an impact on their subject choice rather than some of the schools?
Yes, that did come out strong. The actual environment, although we haven't stated clearly, was a barrier, and the boys. One of our samples was it was in cabins the whole time.
In the whole 5 years.
Yeah, the whole 5 years was just sitting in cabins. And it says that school across the street, which is a grammar school, they've got all this and that. So our sample was very aware of that, and it was important. And it's in the study as an important area. It hasn't been summarised to this here, but the learning environment, the physical, was very, very important.
But again, I would want to add to that, because some of those schools that were, the environment is a factor. But again, what we would be saying to schools is when you move in, does the school invite success? Does the school tell you, irrespective of whether you're in a porta cabin, what's the first thing you see when you come into schools? And we were looking at schools in that way. Is it geared to an ethos of succeeding? And often, that's linked into, policies about disciplines.
Maybe, something...
So there is, some things about you can work, and environmental is clearly... But again, no matter what circumstances you've got, does the school convey an ethos of success? Yes. Is it geared to that from the part? Does a discipline policy connect to getting boys to take responsibility for their actions, or is it about punishment? So there's a lot there, about we're not simple environment where because they're in a porta cabin that affected it. Because many great principals and leaders were able to turn what they have into, is again, that ethos and that mindset.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. If I can take you back to your sort of last comments and what works. I mean, all the way through reading this, and it's an excellent report. But I was thinking, what's the action?
Right.
What is the actual thing we have to do on the ground? And there are so many things in that. I mean, if you get to giving them hope, so it's jobs, getting them to realise there's a whole mass of careers out there that are all available and to train to. How do we take this forward so that we actually really build on all the matters you've picked up to look at different, whether it's action zones and others to pull the community together? How do you see the best way of taking this forward?
Pilots, maybe.
Yeah, you could, sorry,
Yeah, one of the things we're thinking is, and a lot of this is cost neutral. We're not saying here needs massive money spent. See, if you were to say, for instance, take 6 schools, designated areas, because location is a factor, and say, right, we're going to support teachers to think about how they actually work with boys, how they understand boys, what makes them tick, what motivates them. We're going to be trained teachers in that, and so we're going to go into 6 schools and implement that over a period of time. And let's just see if these new ways of engaging, and with the theme of connection, connecting to your lives, connecting to your community, giving boys a voice, and just seeing this in 6 schools over a period of time, if that makes an impact. And as a part of that then it would be, teachers becoming really tuned in to the life and development of boys, which is as important as the education they're getting. Whereas teachers struggle because they're going to say, listen, I have no time for relationships. This is about, for me, getting people to get subjects. But if you could step back from that, even in a pilot setting, and release teachers from that, and maybe start them off by saying, and we're thinking about how that could actually work and how it could be delivered and managed, whatever, to give you some sort of sense. Well, if you're taking that approach, a holistic approach to the development of a boy, not just seeing them, breaking down labels, no stereotypes, challenging masculine stereotypical behaviour, challenging it's too cool, we're too cool for school. So part of the breaks. The use of which we found very effective, and as we delivered ourselves with action, youth work methodologies, group work, activities, creative ways of learning, lots of expression, talking to boys about their feelings and their emotions, and having that part of the curriculum. Boys loved that. In every class that we did it, and the school in Riverstown that did that was the same thing, because they videoed these boys talking. They were saying, "Yeah, I didn't realise this and that and whatever." And schools mean something to me and stuff like that. So that's a practical thing.
There's different levels, Chair. What can you as policymakers do, or set? How can we, help create the scaffolding in the environment where we could? Because this is about closing the gap. Yeah. And one of the keys to that is, and we've focused primarily, we're being asked more than that we can cope with to go to individual schools, and we're thinking it's better to look at this strong leadership, focus on the principals who can affect change, and get this. So we're saying there's things to be done at that level. There's things to be done at the classroom level, and Ken's give a couple of examples, because probably we need to move on from another report. Yeah. We need to move on from. Paul Nolan comes out, recently, and we keep being told the same thing, in a sense, and we'll knee-jerk against that. I don't mean that disrespectfully. But we need to get something happening in the schools that can show that the gap can be changed, can be closed. And as I say, there's one example that, if there was an opportunity, again through the RTU, we know there are teachers out there, and just before we came, and we would encourage you, without being self-promoting, we've got a small DVD that lasts about 9 minutes that I think will start to give you some sense of what we're about through this research. But we've had a number of schools who've said, as a result of listening to you, we've talked to senior management team, and we are willing to try to do something different. Now, somebody needs to plot that, because we're trying to get a sense of what's happening. And there's a group in West Belfast, school in West Belfast the other day rang me up and saying, "We're going to use your video. We're going to launch a new 3-year strategy and working with our boys, etc." And we go, "That's great." But we probably need to track that and see if it's making a difference. But what can you do around the room? And I think certainly to start giving out a very positive message that we are serious about affecting some positive action and change in the classroom, in the schools, to probably one thing that I think would be helpful, and we're having conversations with our own School of Education at the moment about, it's not a magic bullet, but I do think gender-specific approaches are probably required, and some of our teachers, I think, need help. And I think there's things that young women need that are specific, gender-specific, and in the conversations they say, I'm not quite sure our teachers are being fully prepared to be gender conscious about what the needs of young women are and what the needs of young men are, but tend to be trained in some sort of generic approaches. So there's other ideas and things that we have.
I think just something I think we've really got to explore is how we actually make it all work. But before I go to Trevor, just talking about gender specific, does that mean we need more male teachers, or can just as long as they're concentrating on what gender specific is, it doesn't actually matter?
When I hear a lot of analysis, you get this all the time, boys need more role models, and they do. There's a lot of successful boys came from one-parent families where the mother was the head of house. I think we have to watch. There's no doubt that, and Sam says this clearly, that to be a good man, you need to know a good man in some sort of sense, and there's no doubt a woman cannot teach a boy masculinity. She can't do that. And in the classroom, there's a dynamic there. But certainly in youth work, where Sam and I train, when we train workers, and interestingly, on our courses, we train gender as part of our training. Gender conscious practice is important to that there. I've lost my point of thought.
Well, the illustration was in one of the schools that we were in, and the principal was very taken by the importance of helping young men address masculinity. When she looked around her resources for that, there were only 2 men in the staff team. And immediately when we chatted to the 2 men, they felt immediate pressure for that. They understood and related to their own experience how were they helped to come to terms and understanding the role of men. So there is a correlation, I think, between the resources you have in your team. I think also the point you make, Chair, is what exposure do young men get to male teachers, particularly in the primary sector, and that's very, again, the demographics there, tell you males attracted more into secondary teaching than they do primary. So therefore, whenever you get the criticism boys wanting mummied, a lot of the primary exposure is to good female teachers. So there is probably some sense of how do we address what those sort of leadership, that sort of learning that young men can get from male teachers and female teachers.
Yeah, but you could be a male teacher in a school, you'd not be gender or gender conscious, and then it wouldn't matter. So that's the issue with that, I think. But if you're gender conscious, then you would very, like Sam and I, we would probably feel we're very gender conscious in how we work and how we practice and what that means as a practitioner. And we're sort of saying then just sticking men in the classroom isn't the answer.
Thank you. Trevor.
Yeah, I'm wondering why male teachers are so keen to teach in the secondary school rather than the primary. I mean, the figures on here, I haven't studied it in huge detail, but I did notice the 15% figure for male teachers in primary, and the fact that so many primaries don't have any male teachers.
Yes.
Is it a salary thing, or why would it be?
I'm not sure. Being a man myself, maybe our status assumption is something about we fool ourselves about power and status and whatever else. I don't know. There is interesting, because I know some very excellent teachers at primary level and men who just believe that that's where they want to work. So I'm not sure. Our own analysis, and we've done some analysis of people who've come from training through the University of Ulster. Certainly the demographic changes up to about the mid-80s, our course was dominated by men. That sort of men were wanting, but our profession has become very shifted between, we're getting twice as many young women and women coming forward to our training, and I think the same happening in teaching. There's been very much a feminisation, which is a very positive thing of a lot of the caring professions.
Yeah.
And when you look specifically at teaching, whenever you're getting an imbalance of gender coming forward for training, and then the male inclination to go to the secondary, I think there's something we probably need to encourage and make it more attractive. And whether I don't know the answer to your question, and it might be interesting to explore that, because it's very easy for us to say, and I think you would be going in that direction. How do we encourage more male, a nice balance of gender at all levels in education?
It's interesting too that, you know, with a lot of primary schools, certainly I know that where the male is there, they become the principal.
Yes, yes.
That's I
I
can
can only
remember
think of
full female teaching quota when I was at school quite a long time. The principal was male.
Yeah, but I've been thinking about this before now, and it seems to me it might just be as simple as that, you know, a newly qualified teacher's got his training, his learning, his qualification. He thinks it might be better put to use in a secondary situation rather than a primary.
Yeah.
Almost primary is
that they choose consciously.
yeah.
To be honest, Chair, I'm struggling to find, you know, the research that's actually looked at what were those choices, you know, but I think the facts show you where the men are moving, attracted to.
In our next briefing, we'll get a chance to ask the department.
Okay. Could I, Ken, you touched on the Protestant boys scenario, which is of huge interest to us. Obviously, we debated it there a couple of weeks ago, once again. Would you agree with me that it's put out there as a Protestant-Catholic difference? Your report appears to me to concentrate on boys versus girls and perhaps working class versus other class, quite rightly, because it seems to me this thing gets overdone a bit. I mean, if you look at the balance of the population here, that's easy to define. There's people nominate themselves as Catholic and Protestant and other. But in fact, if you look at, say, the church-going figures, you get a completely different set of statistics, and I would guess that out of that 40% who don't achieve the 5 GCSEs, maybe more than half of them never saw the inside of a church of any persuasion. Yeah. So is there Protestantism or their Catholicism really a factor in this at all? But that's what I wonder.
Well, I think that for me the underlying thing here is to see underachievement as the issue. To see that as the issue. We have a society where people underachieve, and try not to lose sight of that, because when you look at it, if you're going to say, well, gender is important and religion is important, then you get some sociology coming and saying, listen, poverty is the main issue, is social disadvantage. Then other people saying, no, it's home life, it's the family. So that's the type of arguments you get into there. But I think the keeping the focus on underachievement is good. And you know, you can see sometimes I hear that the statistics are there. When you look at the levels, the Protestant boys are very low in that there. But how many of them make up? I mean, that may have been a sample of a small sample. We don't know exactly how many that is. So my caution would be not to lose sight of what is the challenges, the closing the gaps, the addressing underachieving, the raise the standard of education. That there's it, and there are pockets. I mean, I come from an inner city Protestant area. I grew up there myself, failed my 11 plus. But Dad worked in the shipyard his whole life. I understand what's happened in Protestant communities, and I can see that, and there are issues there. There's no doubt. But when we talk to people in other communities, as we did in our report, and over the last 12 months, we were up in Ballycastle where we met Merton and stuff like that. The issues are there as well. They're everywhere, and I'm sure people maybe are sitting saying, well, okay, I'm working in a school, it's not a Protestant school, but I can see the issues of underachievement here. So so do we need a strategy for Protestant boys, or should the strategy be for underachievement? I suppose is what I'm saying.
That's really where I'm going with this. You know, I mean, if the ethos of the school must be a factor, no matter what sort of school it is.
Yes.
It does seem to me that the Catholic schools have a much more clearly defined ethos, and they seem to do better. The control schools are not, by definition, Protestant schools. Not quite sure where I'm going with this.
No, it's okay.
I think it's an historical thing. A lot of young boys, irrespective of the religion, get sedimented. Their view of school gets sedimented through probably their grandparents or their parents. You know, so some of the early expectations that are there, and I think there's that's a factor historically. You know, and whether we want to look in, and we have different views on the history of Northern Ireland and the evolution, a very strong Catholic community that bonded together, maybe felt a sense of that the state were not for them. You can get into that territory, and historically, the success being seen through the schools and being encouraged, education being promoted very actively. And then you get, perhaps again, a lazy unionist, loyalist population who, my dad's in the shipyard and I'll walk in there. When you take all that away, so there's a sense of exploring it from that way. One thing that disappointed us, and it's a very factual thing, our case study is a very successful school in taking all of their pupils from an inner city loyalist community. Mm-hmm. And as we explored that school, and I sat with the principal the other night, who is retired now, and his sense of concern now is that they worked so hard to make that a successful school, drew their young people from those inner city East Belfast communities. Now those same boys from those communities are not going to that school because they can't get into it. Because the school is now a success in the sense of those GCSEs. And he's sitting there with this sense of guilt. He's saying, I turned this around, or I helped turn this around. But now, with respect to, if I name places, I don't mean to be... So the people from Hollywood want to send their children there. So the people, because they see it as a good secondary school that gets good results. So the very reason why that school started to address the issues of what you're saying, to low achievement in Protestant schools, is now a victim of its own success. And we've now got a situation where are those young people from the Newtownards Road and Albert Bridge route going? Because they're that natural route, and I might as well name the school, in the confidence, is Ashfield, where that was a school that was criticised, low performance, and you turn it around, and now the very reason why it was trying to turn it around, the same boys are not getting the chance.
Chairman, my last question wouldn't surprise anybody here. I take it none of the schools you looked at was an integrated school.
One of them was.
They were, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
I would love to see the figures, if you're doing any more research, for the comparison between Protestant boys and Catholic boys, or Protestant girls and Catholic girls, in an integrated setting over 5 years. And just see how the results would be, because my instinct would be that you wouldn't get such a big difference.
Yeah.
We didn't get into that, the segregation. I'm always sensitive here because I remember I was shared a platform with Pat once, and his very strong views on integrated education and whatever. So I'm a bit sensitive here. I am personally committed to integrated education as a parent. But your point about the disaggregation of that, we didn't get into that because we talked to boys. We ensured, as our advisory committee insisted, that we made sure that we got rural, urban, mixed, single gender, integrated, grammar and secondary. So we were talking to boys, so we didn't get into that sort of.
Yeah, just a point again. I'm just thinking about, when you think of boys in inner city areas and underachievement, I do think, social factors like paramilitaries. I mean, where I live is very close to a loyalist. It is in the heart of a loyalist area, and there's a place that's run by paramilitaries and stuff like that. And you've still got that legacy, that culture. That has to be a factor in how young boys are growing up. And we've got very powerful murals still on the streets of our. There's no simplistic answer to that there, but you can see a lot of factors that are impacting on boys that are maybe not necessarily to do with the classroom.
Well, thanks for the report. That's terrific. I look forward to getting into it in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of reading them.
Once the election's over,
We're getting a bit tight on time. If we keep the answers short. Sean, you're next.
Thanks. You're very welcome. Very, very interesting comments. Are we saying here that the key switch-off time for boys and switch-off in education is year 10?
I think that's when the impact of their education hits them. That's what we're saying. It hits them then. Before that, it's not really. Even failing your 11 plus, they seem to get over that. It's when that, because that's a fact in the future. That's making them. I'm not going to get a job. I'm not going to be able to live. I'm not going to be able to drive a car. I'm not going to have a mortgage. I'm not going. And that we were near calling that report dawning of reality.
Was any consideration given to obviously when they come into the post-primary, they're happy to give it a go in year 8 and year 9. Any consideration given to careers education, that type of thing as well? Because in year 10 they have to make choice, and if the boy, if he hasn't thought, if they haven't thought through with parents and teachers, etc., the case of follow the crowd.
Yeah. There was certainly, there's a real issue about following peers and peer pressures, and we're not here to be critical of careers teachers or whatever, but the support systems within school, e.g., counselling and careers. For some boys, it wasn't a natural thing to go and seek that sort of support. Even though I think nearly every one of our schools had a very strong counselling support. But when we delved into who used it, it very clearly broke down gender. So you're into being young and male. So things like careers, whilst it's there, the willingness to use it to try to tailor your decisions to career choices, it wasn't as obvious with the boys that we spoke to.
And again, my son's 26 and he doesn't know what he wants to do. He's still trying to find his way, So, but the schools did have that in place. It was there was classes they could go to, but they clearly, they weren't over effective really in terms of boys who were underachieving.
And just, I agree wholeheartedly with you, the relationships and the emotional health and well-being.
Yeah.
There was a good bit of work done by Shauna Cartwright last year with RTU in terms of emotional health and well-being, a pilot. But unfortunately, the department haven't picked it up yet. Did you hook into any of that in terms of the emotional health and well-being of boys?
Well, funny, as we've moved on from this, we're actually, doing young men and violence at the moment, and I think some of the resiliency stuff is coming through very important to help, both social and emotional well-being. And we'd be advocates of that. I think a lot of those, all roads lead to resiliency. So we would be keen to, and we are exploring it, because this was a dual piece of study. What we've said, we've concentrated on the underachievement end. The Department of Justice also co-sponsored this. To understand young men and violence. That's coming out hopefully next year, our work on that. But certainly an issue of resiliency and young people and how we encourage that. Which is both emotional and social well-being and that, so it's an area that we are currently looking into a bit more depth.
Sean, we have an area there just specifically on that emotion. It's a scientific questionnaire which comes out, our boys come out very poorly on it when we compare it with the UK. It's sometimes that we're like double the percentage of people with conduct and behavioural and emotional issues as compared to the UK. So there's definitely stuff going on there.
I think the strong message you're saying there in terms of initial teacher training and continued professional development is actually about cultivating those relationships in the classroom with the boys and whatever else. Because if the boy switches off, it can be very hard to get them switched on. The last point really is in terms of sport and physical activity and that. But is there, in terms of our curriculum, the 1 hour token PE a week? But did you find a correlation between boys who were, say, involved in sport or physical activity? There was less underachievement.
Not as clear as that, but there was higher engagement, higher motivation, more incentives and rewards for boys who sport came out strong in that. There are boys enjoyed. Not every boy likes sport by any means, but the majority seen that as a very active way. And it combats boredom and sitting. 16-year-olds sitting 6 hours at a desk writing, taking notes from the blackboard. They would rather be out there, adventure. There's that part in it, isn't there? This seeks adventure and wants adventure, and boys don't connect adventure or excitement with school.
Funny, I was reading, I think it was a Principal Eaton wrote recently, and a very simple thing, and I think the chair was alluding to it either. Some of these things are very simple, and he said, I put a simple message: if you see a boy leaving a seat to move around in a classroom, don't punish them. Because something is about that, just sometimes physical, the boredom. So simple stuff like that. And that was coming from, says that, instinctively control of the classroom and being a teacher, all of those facts. So a confident teacher who is comfortable with that. And that's what the boys said. We love a teacher. We have a wee chart in our study that says the ideal teacher. And what boys described as an ideal teacher. And it's quite revealing when the teachers share that, because a lot of it is about, the one that can have a chat with you, the one that knows your name, the one that, it's a lot of relational stuff there, and also the one that is comfortable in the classroom. And the boys said in that chart, the ones that can control the classroom. And control's not about having them sitting there. It's movement about and allowing some boys who just want to move about because they're bored. And boredom and agitation led to misbehaviour. We know that. So the sport one is also about just boys being involved physically. And kinesthetic approaches within the classroom, and giving teachers that repertoire to have a variety during the hour that they maybe have them.
Thank you.
Ken, can I apologise for not being here for your presentation? Thank the Vice Chair for conducting proceedings to this stage. Thank you for your report. Thank you for the work that you've done. You play an invaluable role in terms of the tapestry of information that we have as a committee, and education has generally, in terms of informing us on what is a very, very important issue. So thank you for coming, and we'll go now to Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Again, thanks. Very interesting presentation indeed. Pack. It mentions in there that only 15% of primary teachers are male. And indeed, even thinking of my own primary school education, it was just the P7 teacher that was male. If that figure was 30 or 40%, what would the difference be on the education of boys?
I think we need to find that out. You know, there's nothing that's going to highlight that now, because it may have been misnomer. It may be leading us down the garden path. We're not sure about that. I mean, we don't know what a role model is. We don't know high influence in them. There's lots of areas begging for research and to be carried out. And it wouldn't it be great to answer that question?
And another just final point, I know we're cut for time. Again, looking back at my own education and anecdotal evidence even lately, around what we've touched on it again today, is around the wider holistic subjects, be it, you know, in our school it was called education for love or life or something like that, and sex education and general that type of holistic education. For me, too many of our schools are decades behind where they probably need to be in relation to that. Am I right in thinking that? Is that something that feeds into this as well?
If we give you an illustration of that, you know, I think we keep changing the vocabulary around this. What do we call it now? Do we call it citizenship, or do we call it whatever? A very simple question to the boys, you know, about that, and we asked them about. We used the terminology called peace process, and to a boy, they went, "What?" You know, so something about how the boys connect, something that is about them, their growing up, their community, and their society. That the school has under a curriculum called maybe citizenship or something else. The boys weren't connecting that. You know, the experience of sitting in that classroom didn't travel into them saying they had an understanding of a role in the peace process, the understanding of a role in a society coming out of conflict, the understanding of what citizenship actually meant. You know, so the area you're saying about the boys just did not, they just saw it as something that sat apart and were it connected to their lives. It was, and that was disappointing for us. Although we used vocabulary like peace process, we did go on to explore and use very similar language to yourself. But what about the class that's about that? And they went, oh yeah.
Chris, one thing I say, you know, and I think there's a real challenge here to society, how we keep up with social media and how young people learn. We're behind. They could educate us in terms of the social media and, you know, education. I was watching a programme the other night on television about how boys learn about sex, and it's just pure porn. Everyone just says porn, just going on, that's how we learn it. And there's something very concerning there and challenging to our society. They would laugh at the way they learn about those things in school.
Yeah.
And to be honest, as Sam says, like for me, when I was in school, it was the same. It was round the back entries with magazines, and that's how we learned. So school doesn't seem to have got its act together in that. But there is something about the way young people communicate through social media, which is very challenging and needs a re-input on it. We again, that's an issue we address on our course and training our professional youth workers to be aware of, and just the dangers that lie around that. And there's a lot, you know, when you begin to unpack a young person's life. I mean, we're touching on social media. There's other areas that Sam and I have talked about, like young people gambling. I don't think we've awakened to what's going on in that area. Betfred is a 1.2 billionaire. And I know young lads at 15 and 16 who every halfpenny they're earning is lost if Liverpool's beat Derby. You know, from the young. So there's things in our society moving at a far faster pace than what we're responding to them that we're going to reap. in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thanks. Sorry, there was just one I forgot. It's around the idea of single identity schools. Be that, we talk very often about religious segregation, but I have an interest around single sex schools. Does this come into your research at all? Like when a school is an all boys school, is the problems amplified or the lessened, or if it's
around violence? Yes, violent. They're more violent, more aggressive, or whatever. But do you know the challenge there is? Boys can't differentiate between what's just banter and roughing around and actual violence. So me punching Sam, that's just a bit of banter or whatever. But in the all male schools, that was a lot higher. That was one of the findings from it, the mixed gender school.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
I know we're over.
Okay. Pat?
And just thanks, gentlemen. I just want to come in on that last point because it was one of the questions that I had. In terms of underachievement between single-sex and co-ed schools, was there any difference at all?
Again, we try to avoid that disaggregation. They're all under. We didn't. We have to answer you. No, we didn't look specifically at that and the correlation. But some of your league tables will reveal that. Where are the top performing schools? The all-female schools. Young women certainly perform well. And when we have disseminated this to young people who are both male and female, usually the young women would say they prefer to work on their own, and the young men prefer mixed schools. So there is a performance issue about certainly single-sex schools. It's the girls that are appearing in the top of the league tables, single-sex schools.
And I know you're saying you didn't want to disaggregate it, but did you factor in the issue of schools that had pupils from a mixed socio-economic background, as opposed to, particularly non-selective schools that would attract kids mainly from disadvantaged areas?
Not to that level, I think that you would require a specific answer to that. What we did do is obviously, for example, one of our schools being in a very in the controlled sector that was grammar. The issues pertaining to their performance and their issues of being young and male was virtually the same as being. They were frightened with regards to the communities and going home and in and out of communities. Violence was an important part of their life. So it was just as important in the grammar school how they negotiated and survived their communities as it was in some of the more intense areas. So we didn't see any necessarily difference along those lines, to be honest.
Just a couple of points on that. Post-publication, we've had several grammar schools coming to us and met the principals, and they're saying to us, listen, okay, our boys are doing well here. They've talked about suicide that occurred in the school. And so you can't just say grammar school boys don't have issues, because they do. We all do and stuff like that. So there's a danger of just saying, let's only do that. And clearly when we went and we have worked with grammar school teachers, and you see a lot of issues coming through. It doesn't mean there's no issues within that. And the other point between the boys and girls, one that came out in the study very clearly is girls, if you think of a 14-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy, the maturity levels are amazing. To the extent that one of the schools who we work with actually were considering, and I don't think they'll do this, but they were actually playing the idea, well, wonder what happened if we put boys 2 years below girls coming in, so that it was like a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old boy, but would something happen around that there? But there is a consideration there that maybe when you look at gender as a factor in underachievement, is age and biology and maturity a factor in that? Because, when we talk to boys, and they joke about this, say, well, when did you become a man? When do you think you're going to mature? And then you draw upon yourself. Like, I imagine I was 28 or something before I would have felt mature. And so, but I remember a boy at school, and because I'm small and girls are 5'10", you feel, that there's subtle issues there as well within gender analysis and the mixed schools.
And just one final question, Chair. Just in regard to this lowering of aspiration in Year 10, and I know Sean has already touched on it, but, there's a lot of research saying that, there should be a lot more attention to early intervention, that a greater proportion of the resources should go into early years. But can we identify And I know you've said it's sort of there's a dawning of reality at year 10 that kids then understand, you know, or it dawns on them that they're not going to get a job, they're not going to get qualifications and all of that. Was there any thinking done on how to counteract that? Is it more resources in the early years? Or what is it?
I think there is certainly a strong lobby, and I think Dawn Purvis' report would have highlighted some of the advantages of investment there. But one of the problems in that sort of in a zero sum is if you have to take from somewhere to put somewhere else, and therefore I don't think that works. We would prefer to talk about focused attention. You know, I think some of the issues about early identification, certainly in nursery school and primary school, would see some of the indicators that some of these young people will not necessarily perform as readily. Because one of the illustrations of that is when we went into, I remember going into a primary school, which just happened to be in a part of Belfast. There was a teacher at primary 1 physically holding 2 boys, physically holding them and teaching a class. So what had happened there was she had to make a judgment to teach and at the same time constrain 2 boys who were behaving in a particular way. Now, what was happening there, and what we found out when you look at that, those boys would have been carrying probably that reputation from very early on. So the intervention needed to be there. And there is work. There is work, and we, as I say, we're working with a colleague where you can work at that point between the teacher, the pupil that identifies at the nursery school very early on, and the home to try to, you know, prepare those young people to actually be able to sit in the school and learn. But what was happening was there are problems that you can identify earlier, and I think that you can make some interventions. But I wouldn't want to be shifting resources, you know, from one side of the system, you know, to support. Early intervention and, as I say, prior achievement is a good indicator of success. We do need some focused attention where behavioural problems and issues are being identified early and address them. But at the same time, and we will repeat this, there will be issues of adolescence that will occur, and we need resources for that. Most of our work and our ideas will be about how that classroom should change, how that school should change its thinking with a view to addressing, closing the gap for young men and ours.
And just on the issue of Icefield, obviously that's a case where, you know, there has been good leadership, dynamic leadership has changed the whole thing around. And there's an example in my own constituency, a school that was doing very badly in terms of educational outcomes, even in terms of managing their budget. A new principal came in, and he has turned everything right around. You know, so in terms of that lowering of aspiration, I mean, we have a situation here where even one individual can make a difference in a school. But the opposite side of the coin, are there situations where there's a lowering of aspiration among teachers, which is transferred onto the pupils?
The reality will tell you, and again in private conversations with our head teachers in a number of schools, they would say there's good teachers and there's bad teachers. And as such, I have to manage personnel accordingly. You know, so there are, and I think that's what we talk about, one of our ideas about the ethos of a school, being one about success and encouraging staff. And we've had teachers who come to us, and some of our feedback saying, the first time I went into the staff room, they told me, don't try that because it'll not work. So there are things that do need to be turned around. There are teachers, you know, for whatever reason, you know, will probably be stuck in their ways. But, and I think you do put your finger on it, the success where we see the good schools, it is about good leadership and investing in that. And I think the leadership coming from the top, an ethos that says this school is going to succeed, and encouraging and training and retraining staff, you know, to be in the way and to capture that ethos and to carry it out consistently is quite crucial. And some of our examples, I would know the school you're talking about there, and it's probably interesting that the vintage of the principal is very similar to the one in Icefield in terms of their background to and understanding those communities. But leadership is so crucial, and that's where we put a lot of our investment.
Just to make a final point on that, one of the things that we find is near a resistance among schools to share good practice. It's hard to track down. There's a lot of good practice out there, and for some reason, it doesn't seem to be being shared. So, and Sam and I have been in the presence of many teachers, and one actually said, "Could someone give an example of sharing good practice?" And it didn't happen. So there's a resistance there, and it'd be interesting to find out why that is, and whatever, or how can schools find mechanisms for sharing good practice. So, what did that person do, and have they done, and is that general knowledge around education?
Thank you. And Danny.
Really, just to throw in a different thing, I've always been concerned that we're looking at schools and others, and in Switzerland they have a thing called civic dienst where everyone does, I think it's a year or 2 years as part of society, whether it's in boiler suits or in others. Is that an avenue we should be looking for? It's something where it's not national service, but it's something where you all are all part of the same, and pride and pulling together. And
See if I turn that around slightly and look at some of the examples of good practice. I know I'm not going to be literal here with what you're saying. Very simply, one of the successes of a school, and we mentioned it there at Icefield, was to do something what I would call similar to what you're thinking of. They very simply profiled the constituency in which that school sat, looked at the needs and issues of that community, one of which was apparently high incidences of break-ins to the old people, elderly homes. So very simply, what that principal did was the woodwork class, the metalwork class, simply made locks for the homes.
Yeah.
The boys fitted them.
Yeah.
So immediately you were getting a breakdown in terms of age, understanding, boys understanding their community, senior citizens who felt they're not that bad. So there's I know I'm taking license with your example, but it's a very practical way. So that's the school in the community, not the community in the school. That's the school in the community. So again, with Pat's point, a leader who sees the relationship of having to have their strategic plans linked to the needs of their community in a very simple way
Very good.
can help turn relationships around, and a very practical service. So there's an illustration of where that service to your community, albeit without niceness. Okay.
And the one thing I'm just to change the language of what you're saying. In some ways, I think you're talking about a rite of passage for boys, and I think that is an excellent idea and has a lot of mileage in it. And places where that has happened, is a very clear message. Where boys come through a process and then they feel part of something. Unfortunately, school isn't a rite of passage for a lot of boys. Do you know what I mean? So if you're jumping sky high with your A-level results and your GCSEs and you haven't got them, then whatever. So when you talk about key aspects of your life and factors, so there's something in what you're saying, and I don't think we've got our head around that. But in places, even though it is national service or whatever, that has been very successful and demonstrated to be successful.
Well, that's why I went for civic. The civic
Yes.
one is a
Yes.
much better way of looking at it because it's
Yep.
not military.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you. Thanks.
Sam, Ken, thank you very much. Thank you for the paper, thank you for the report, and I have no doubt that we'll be returning to this issue in the future, and thank you for your contribution that you did this morning.
Well, thank you to you all. Thank you very much. Thanks for reading the report. And if you need anything at all, you know where we are.
Yep, thank you. Okay. Just to sum up, members, maybe then what we should do is maybe write to the department and ask them if they have any gender-specific policies in terms of teacher training, and especially maybe looking at gender issues in extended school programmes. Just to see, following on from some of the comments that were made earlier, we also want to seek, yes, if the department was responsive to the recommendation, because we still haven't had anything from the department in relation to the responses to the recommendation. So if we could ask the department for an update in regards to that as well. Okay? Thank you. Okay, members, we'll move on then to the sickness absence in the public sector, and that's from the department, a briefing on the Northern Ireland Audit Office report on employee absence in schools, and you'll find the clerk's cover note, which is page 276 to 282. They're also included in the papers for information and relevant extracts of the Northern Ireland Audit Office report and the relevant departmental correspondence and other reports. They recall that the committee wrote to the finance personnel for the finance and personnel, they wrote to us seeking this committee's views on the relevant parts of the Audit Office report. We can now welcome the members to the committee this morning. Thank you. Laverne Montgomery, Director of Education Workforce Development, Barry Jordan, the Director of Human Resources, Ian Moore, Head of Workforce Planning Team, and Barbara Swalls, the Head of the Departmental Resource Team. You're very welcome. Thank you for your patience, and to ask either Laverne or Barry, whoever, to make a few comments, and then members will have questions. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Chair, for your welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to provide you with the oral briefing on the Department's response to the Northern Ireland Audit Office's 2013 report on sickness absence in the public sector. As you're aware, the report focused on sickness absence in 3 areas of the public sector: health and social care trusts, the Northern Ireland Civil Service and the education sector. In my role as Director of Education Workforce Development, I'm pleased to be able to outline for you what the Department has done in response to the report and what we plan to do in respect of staff across the education sector. And Barry Jordan is going to be dealing with matters relating specifically to the Department. If you're content that we take it in that order, Chair. Regarding the report findings, I would like to deal specifically with what the Department has done to date and what we still plan to do in relation to the Northern Ireland Audit Office's recommendations. And I'll take the recommendations in turn, Chair. Recommendation 1. Particular attention needs to be focused on reducing long-term sickness absence levels as a result of its significance on overall sickness absence levels. In relation to the teaching workforce, employing authorities report that long-term sickness among teachers is a major reason why they have difficulty in reducing teacher absenteeism to the levels that the target has been set by the Department. As a period of long-term sickness absence for a range of serious illnesses are difficult for the Department and employing authorities to influence, attention to date has focused on addressing issues such as stress, depression, mental and physical fatigue. Working with the employers and the trade unions, a number of measures and initiatives and policies have been introduced to try and reduce the long-term absenteeism of teachers experiencing these illnesses, and that includes the provision of an independent 24-hour confidential telephone counselling service to all teachers, introduction of schemes to improve the flexibility of teachers' working patterns, conditions and workload, the development of the teachers' health and wellbeing strategy, and the development of a policy statement on tackling violence and abusive behaviour against teachers. In relation to the non-teaching workforce, Chair, following on from the development and publication of the regional strategy for the management of teacher attendance, a working group has been established to look at the feasibility of developing an education-wide composite strategy. The departmental working group is comprised of the Department, the Education and Library Boards and CCMS at this stage, although we are looking at the potential of including some of the smaller arm's-length bodies. We have identified the need for consistency in this regard and the need to share best practice. It has been identified that the need for more support for managers in implementation of policies in the form of suitable training will also be required. The working group has established that the support mechanisms available to teachers are also available to all non-teaching staff, and this includes occupational health, staff welfare and care call. Whilst these mechanisms are in place for non-teaching staff and have been widely promoted, the working group has found that there is still a lack of awareness of the existence of these services, and this is something that the group is going to address.
It is envisaged that the composite strategy will be developed and hopefully published during this planning year, and Kieran Moore is chairing that working group on behalf of the Department. In relation to recommendation 2, targets should be extended to include overall sickness absence levels for non-teaching staff and long-term sickness levels, and that the Department should consider the introduction of a combined measure identifying overall sickness absence levels for both teaching and non-teaching. I have to acknowledge, Chair, that in recent years, much of the Department's attention has been focused on the attendance targets for teachers, as the impact of an absent teacher is felt more immediately by a school and its pupils than perhaps some of the non-teaching staff. Absent teachers are usually replaced by substitute teachers, which clearly results in associated costs, and in an attempt to reduce these costs, the Department set the employing authorities quite substantial targets over a number of years to reduce teacher absence to rates achieved in England. And we are currently working with the employing authorities to develop joint combined targets for both teachers and non-teachers. However, as noted in our response to the committee in advance of today's oral briefing, the same level of statistical information and analysis in relation to non-teaching staff is currently not available. Whilst the Department manages the payroll for the majority of teaching staff, we don't manage the non-teaching payroll, and while the overall system is provided by the same resource link, the boards have yet to develop a range of bespoke software that is currently used by the Department to produce a wide range of absence monitoring data. Each education and library board operates their own payrolls for non-teaching staff, and the Department doesn't have access to that. So we're working with the education and library boards to develop those monitoring systems. As you're aware, the non-teaching workforce is highly diverse and complex. Employee groups range from professional staff, administrative, supportive, ancillary, and have an extensive variety of contractual working patterns, including full-time, part-time, casual, multi-job working, full-year workers and part-year term-time workers. Much has been done during the last year since the report has issued in this regard. Employing authorities have completed work to develop a more accurate method for calculating the organisational sickness absence rate for non-teaching staff, and the boards established a working group tasked with developing a more accurate and credible methodology to measure organisational sickness absence, which could be adjusted to take account of the complexities of the contractual arrangements for non-teaching workforce. The group has developed a methodology to look at the issues relating to what they call multi-jobbers. So they have something in the region of 40% more posts than employees. So that shows you the level of multi-jobbing across the non-teaching workforce. And this results in the number of sick days recorded significantly outnumbering the employees' available working days. They have adapted methodology, therefore, to take this into account, and they have developed a baseline figure for sickness absence rates for 12-13. Overall, across all of the education and library boards, organisation sickness absence rate for 12-13 is 8.7 days, or 5.07% of working time lost. These figures are calculated on the basis of working days per post and not per employee. In 2014-15, having established and agreed this baseline figure, the boards, in conjunction with the department, will agree target reductions in staff absence levels for all the education and library boards. Unfortunately, as I've said, data is not yet readily available at a strategic level, such as the breakdown of long-term and short-term absence gender differentials, but that is what the working group is going to be tasked and is tasked with developing. The human resource requirements can often conflict with payroll priorities, and this can cause difficulties in establishing these monitoring systems. The current information systems are not sufficiently sophisticated to take account of the complex aspects of non-teaching contracts, and therefore the Education and Library Boards have committed to resolving these issues. In relation, Chair, to Recommendation 3, where routine data analysis and reporting in relation to both teaching and non-teaching staff should include the level of long-term sickness, the main causes of absence and the duration, gender, age and grade profile. Again, in recent years, we have focused with our statisticians to work with the teachers' pay team to develop additional analysis of teacher absence rates, and we now are in a position to be able to report including duration, short, medium and long term, gender and age. A report of teacher sickness absence rates is now available quarterly and annually for each school to each employing authority, which allows them to approach schools individually and discuss any particular issues that have been identified. As I've previously said, in relation to non-teaching, the level of statistical information and analysis is not yet available, and therefore extracting this information is much more in-depth for the non-teaching workforce than in relation to the teaching workforce. We have approximately 51,000 non-teaching posts across the Education and Library Boards in 2013-14. There are other obstacles to producing specific management information reports. As I've said, the diverse nature of the workforce, difficulty in identification across the payroll systems where they're not linking the information between employees and posts, inconsistent implementation of policies and procedures across the different education and library boards, and resources in the education and library boards having been depleted over recent years through voluntary severance processes. However, the education and library boards are committed to producing more strategic absence management information and to developing more relevant information systems. The next phase of the working group is to examine the obstacles and identify ways in which they are going to be resolved. Departmental sickness absence management information reports are to be developed to enable line management, monitoring and relevant action at both local and departmental level. And departmental level there, I'm talking about departments within the Education and Library Boards. Again, much groundwork has to be done in resolving these issues, and it will pose a significant challenge in the constraint resource situation that we find ourselves in. We have to be conscious that we're not going to be in a position to produce like for like at this stage for the teaching workforce and the non-teaching workforce, but that certainly is where we're aiming to get to. Recommendation 4. Statisticians and other relevant specialists should be involved in the development and specification of targets, setting up systems that capture and analyse relevant data, ensuring high-quality management information is produced. Again, I've provided some further information in relation to what we're doing for the teaching workforce, and that we produce an annual statistics data digest in June each year and place it in the Assembly Library, and that we continue to monitor on a quarterly basis what we call our traffic light reports in relation to teachers. The main issue and focus for the next year will be on the non-teaching workforce. As I have said, the Education and Library Boards have now agreed a methodology and a baseline for identification of absence levels. And I understand that the Association of Chief Administrative Officers of the Education and Library Boards are due to meet on the 20th of this month, next week, when the figures and appropriate benchmarking arrangements will be considered. And certainly they are looking at benchmarking with other relevant organisations. They're looking specifically at the Health and Social Care Trusts, which were also reported on in the NIO's report as a potential local benchmarking partner, but they will also look further afield. And they have also made contact with NISRA to seek their assistance in identifying suitable benchmarking partners. As I've said, the target that will be developed for reducing staff absence in 14-15 will be done in conjunction with the department. We will also be ensuring that that target is sufficiently robust and challenging, whilst recognising the issues that the Education and Library Boards are facing in relation to the monitoring data. And finally, Chair, recommendation 5, the Department should take a more strategic role in the promotion and monitoring of sickness absence management across the sector. The recommendation stated that the creation of ESA will provide an opportunity for the development of more comprehensive management information systems and facilitate a more regional approach to sickness absence management. As you're aware, the Department chairs quarterly Managing Attendance Forum, where the employing authorities are brought together to discuss best practice and share strategies for managing attendance, and that we have recently launched the strategy of managing and promoting teacher attendance with the employing authorities. The strategy has issued only recently in March, and certainly the initial feedback that we've received is that schools are using it in conjunction with the other policies and procedures that exist. The issue of teacher absence is regularly raised by the Permanent Secretary at the quarterly governance and accountability meetings with the Chief Executives of all employing authorities, and the Department will continue to focus on work to identify the main causes of sickness absence in the teaching workforce. The Department has convened the working group, which, as I say, Kieran chairs, in relation to the non-teaching workforce, and that focus at the moment is on the Education and Library Boards with input from CCMS. And we will be looking at developing a similar strategy, initially for the non-teaching workforce, but with the long-term aim of having a composite strategy for the entire education workforce. We have to ensure that the expectations are managed in relation to where we find ourselves regarding the non-teaching data and the amount of groundwork that needs to be done in relation to that. The Department and the employing authorities are committed to improving the management and promotion of attendance for the non-teaching workforce in line with what has been achieved for the teaching workforce. Chair, that was very quick canter through the recommendations and the position that the Department has reached as of today. I'm happy to take questions at this stage, or if you'd prefer Barry to deal with the departmental issues.
Thank you for that, Laverne, because it's like all issues when we come to look at this, there's a variety of things, and it's where you start and it's what element do you pick out. But I think one of the issues which is certainly a concern for us is ensuring that we have a workforce, particularly in the teaching and non-teaching, that its needs are being met. Now, clearly, when you see figures, particularly in relation to teachers and mental health issues, it is extremely worrying. And my concern is that we had a health and wellbeing survey in 2001. You're now in 2014, and we still have working groups. We're still looking at it, and we're still reviewing it, and the issue and the problems are still there. Another issue is, I'm worried about this multi-jobbers phrase. We get beaten up in this building and outside it repeatedly for a thing called double jobbing. Maybe you could expand a wee bit on multi-jobs and how, because that seems to be an issue. And I also then want to ask, well, is there any zero-hour contracts amongst all of that provision of different working arrangements. But I may want to ask Kieran a particular question, and that is in relation to his review, which is non-teaching. Non-teaching are employed by the Education Library Board. And I think Laverne said that the review was having a discussion with ELBs and CCMS. CCMS doesn't employ non-teaching staff. Now, what they do employ is teachers. And the figures, and I wasn't aware of this until I read the report, that the figures for teachers under the control of CCMS has the highest level of sickness, 11.4 and 7.8 days respectively. So in terms of the organisation, whether it's ELB or CCMS, what actions are they taking to ensure that there is a redress to those particular issues? There's a number of questions in there, but Laverne, if you want to start, and then Kieran.
Certainly, Chair. You're absolutely right in that the original survey was published in June 2002, Teachers' Health and Wellbeing, and that this has been an ongoing issue that the Department, in conjunction with the employing authorities, boards of governors, etc., have been tackling. It's one of those classics. It's a journey rather than a destination. It is something that we will always have to keep under review. One of the major steps forward in relation to the outcomes of that survey was the establishment of a health and wellbeing group within the Teachers Negotiating Committee, and that group is a standing group that is chaired by Avril O'Callaghan from the Ulster Teachers Union. So it is a joint working party between the employing authorities, the department and all of the teacher unions. And again, a strategy was launched in 2011 by that group, and a number of the recommendations within that strategy have been addressed successfully, but there are still a number of those recommendations still to be addressed. So it is an ongoing piece of work. The group will be meeting shortly again to look at what recommendations still have to be addressed, and there are issues regarding support for boards of governors and for principals in dealing with teacher attendance specifically, because there is only so much that can be done by the employing authorities from a distance, and we are very conscious that the onus is on the principals and the boards of governors. One of the issues that came out of the strategy was that within the Board of Governors there would be, for want of a better description, an attendance czar. There would be one governor who would have that overall responsibility for managing attendance, both teaching and non-teaching, and would have the responsibility of reporting to the governors and keeping that as a standing item on governors' agenda, so that governors are fully aware of the situation within their own school. So totally recognise, Chair, that there is still work to be done, but that it is very much an area of work that the Department, the employing authorities and the unions are speaking as one and are working closely together to address. Your second issue in relation to multi-jobbers, and it's this issue that there's some 40% more posts than people. So when we look at school-based staff, we find that there may be one individual who has a contract as a part-time classroom assistant, perhaps a special needs assistant working with an individual child for part of the day. That same individual may also be the lunchtime supervisor, so would have a separate contract as lunchtime supervisor. That same individual could be an after-schools supervisor, say for children getting on and off getting on the buses to go home in the afternoon, and they would have a separate contract for that post. So effectively that one individual has 3 jobs, and the system as is currently established, we're finding it that we could over-report the level of absence because of the posts. But equally, that is a concern. We could have a situation on the non-teaching workforce where one person's absence means that there are 3 posts, there are 3 jobs that are affected by that one person's absence. And again, when it comes to teachers, immediately when a teacher is absent, there will be a substitute teacher identified and put into place. That is not always the case for the non-teaching, and it will be on a case-by-case basis as to if and when that post is backfilled in an attendance situation. So it is easier, Chair, to deal with the teaching workforce as a composite. When we come to look at the complexities of the non-teaching workforce and look at strategies to address attendance issues, we're finding that they have to be more flexible in the approach, because they have particular issues that wouldn't necessarily be identified for the teaching workforce. In relation to the working group, and certainly Kieran can give you further information in relation to that, the working group is an extension of the Managing Attendance Forum that we have established a number of years ago to look at the teacher attendance. And CCMS was a member of that working group because of effectively half the teachers are employed by CCMS. CCMS is also an arm's length body and has responsibilities for their own non-teaching staff, but they would be deemed headquarters staff. Yeah. You're absolutely right, they don't employ non-teaching staff in maintained schools. That's all education and library boards. So we are conscious that in having CCMS around that table, we may have to extend the membership of that working group to bring in the other smaller arm's length bodies, because equally they will have issues around managing attendance for their what we would call headquarters staff. So certainly that's something that we are looking at. And as I say, Kieran can say some more about the working group, Chair, but the final issue regarding the figures for teachers in the Catholic maintained sector and the level of sickness, CCMS are part of that Managing Attendance Forum, so the good practice and the best practice that we share is equally shared across all sectors, regardless of what sector the teachers are employed. What we find, perhaps more anecdotally than necessarily based in research, is that across the Catholic maintained sector we would have a very strong pastoral ethos and a very strong support mechanism that would help the teaching workforce in relation to the attendance issues that they find, but not necessarily the veracity of getting the individuals back to work. And that's something that the CCMS are grappling with, that balance between the pastoral aspect and the need for very strict adherence to managing attendance thresholds and ensuring that if someone is off for a period, say, of 20 days, once they hit that trigger point, ensuring that boards of governors and principals are referring them to occupational health as quickly as they should. So that is an area that CCMS are concentrating on, and recognise that that's an area for them to tackle.
Just in relation to the forum, before we go to Kieran, in relation to the forum, ELDs and CCMS are included. Why not GMI schools? Voluntary grammars and
exactly that is we are considering now extending the membership of that group. The reason that we've focused on particularly the education and library boards is because they have the greatest number of non-teaching employees, and certainly they have the ability to work together through their chief administrative officers to bring a commonality of approach across those 5 organisations. So it really has been targeting where the greatest impact would be felt.
Okay. Kieran, do you want to comment?
Just to say, I mean, in relation to the working group, I mean, to date it's been very much about building on the work that has been already done around developing baselines, and a lot of good work that has been carried out by the boards on the technical side of things. The involvement of CCMS, and as Laverne has alluded to, other arm's length bodies, is very much around sharing best practice, trying to find out and get a good handle on what is already out there in terms of how they manage attendance, to make sure that we get as complete a picture as possible in terms of moving on and trying to develop a strategy that will work for the non-teaching staff.
Thank you. We'll go to question. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank you for your briefing? Laverne, I note your quote. You said you had a journey rather than a destination, and I certainly would share the concern of the Chair. I would suggest we certainly have a very long way to go with that journey. Could I focus first of all on the issues surrounding employees returning to work after a period of absence? Some of my constituents have told me that they have been unable to return to work on a phased basis because of funding issues, and often, as you know, the system does not allow for a phased return. It's either all or nothing. Do you feel that more could be done to help those people return to work? And I know that they would certainly have benefited from the phased. It just seems quite a dictatorial reproach rather than phase them in, gently return to work. Could you? And also, what impact do you feel by having Northern Ireland's long-term absence rate being higher than the rate in England? Would a more flexible return to work policies in place, would that help that as well?
Certainly, I am surprised that that's the feedback that you're getting in relation to returning to work, because certainly since the establishment of the change around from having a sick line that says you can't work to the fitness to work and identification of the potential limitations of someone returning to work, but at least getting them back to work on that phased basis is something that the employing authorities have very much bought into and is part of the teacher attendance strategy. So I am concerned that that's not necessarily filtering through to the ground, and the mechanisms for returning to work on a phased basis should be part and parcel of that return to work process. The key is getting someone back, getting them back sooner. The evidence shows that if someone is off in short term, that there is a critical point at which that can turn into a long-term absence, and therefore hitting those trigger points and identification early is absolutely critical. So I am concerned that that's not the feedback that you're getting, that there's obstacles being put in the way, and that's certainly something that I will raise with the Health and Wellbeing Strategic Group. It's very much part and parcel of the policy, and therefore funding should not be put as an obstacle in order to get people back to work sooner. In relation to the higher levels that we're finding here, they have been reducing over the last number of years, I believe, because of this very clear focus on teacher attendance. And certainly our reporting mechanisms have got to the point where that earlier identification, I believe, is having an impact. So certainly I think that there's still work to be done, we acknowledge that, and that's why it remains a standing working group within the Teachers Negotiating Committee.
Okay, another point, if I may, Chair, it's about, I have encountered, like never before, so many teachers, principals stepping down, and we are losing so much of that expertise. What they have given to their schools, it's going to be so difficult to replace. So it's not just absenteeism as well. There's quite a lot because of the pressures, as you know, that are on principals and teachers at the minute with absenteeism. But so many are deciding they're going. Every day I'm being amazed. There's someone else I'm hearing that, and that's just in my constituency of Upper Bann. So are you on top of this situation, because we are losing so much expertise there? What are you doing? Do you have the figures? I'm worried because I have the utmost respect for it. It's quite shocking the amount that are stepping down. Are you on top of this, that they are being replaced adequately, and how we can? We're in very real danger, I feel, given the quantity that I'm hearing of how that will affect targets, how that will affect the school when we are losing so many valuable teachers and principals. What's your take on that? Because I can only speak for my constituency of Upper Bann is quite alarming. I'm sure it's the same all over. What's your take on that? Are you on top of that situation? What are you doing to redress this and to make sure that the right people will be in place then, so that ultimately, you know, the education of our children doesn't suffer?
Certainly, over the last number of years, one of the focuses of the Teachers Negotiating Committee has been to look at flexible working arrangements, the whole issue of part-time working, job share. This was something that previously would have not been encouraged, let's say, for posts of seniority within schools, but in recognition that the need to have that work-life balance, there have been major changes to all of those policies that affect flexible
Is
working.
that filtering down, Laverne? Because I just keep hearing, I've had enough, I can't take it. And, you know, and those are so many dedicated teachers, and it is quite shocking to me. Is this filtering down, this flexibility, or is it?
Well, again, that is something that we believe is getting through to governors. That's why the employing authorities are there to offer that advice and guidance and the training that is available for governors as well. We do have formal mechanisms that would allow individuals to have a formal stepping down, but we're not seeing a huge take-up in relation to that. That's not something that we're very conscious that, given the changes to pension and so forth, that people are expected to work longer, and therefore we are very conscious of providing that additional support to enable that to happen. Certainly, we monitor the amounts of retirements or resignations, and therefore the amounts of appointments as a result
just
of
particularly
that.
high, or is it the same all over?
It isn't coming out as a major issue that people are going early or earlier than previous.
So it's right across, uniform across?
Well, we have now just literally, as of yesterday, launched a new efficient discharge process, which is something that the employers and the unions have been very keen to reignite within the system, and that is where it is found that an individual has got to a point where they are no longer able to meet the needs of the changing curriculum, or the results for their individual pupils are suffering as a result, that there is a mechanism now that would allow them to access early retirement in that sense. But that has literally just been launched for this year.
That feeds into the figures, the pressures that they're under. It's not just absenteeism, it's just deciding to go. They've had enough. And they're going.
And certainly that is something that we recognise. We don't want people to get to a point where they go off ill, or they have make a decision to leave teaching altogether. We want to have mechanisms in place through flexible working that would enable people to have a balance that is appropriate for their own circumstances.
Certainly hope then there's not too many more in through the office with the flexibility, because it certainly has been an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Trevor.
Thanks, Chairman. We've looked at this before, didn't we? And the Public Accounts Committee looked at it as well in my time. And I always come out with the same impression, frankly, that the teaching profession does pretty well in this respect. I'm not saying this for the benefit of whoever might be listening, but it's a fact. It's a stressful job, and yet they're below the averages by any reasonable comparison. So, well done. But there's one figure here I don't understand, about the long-term sickness absence, more than 20 days. Because that's just the way it's compared. It actually says that over here it represents 60% of total days lost, but in England only 2% of absences last for more than 20 days. I suppose the obvious question, what percentage of absences in Northern Ireland that last for more than 20 days? Is there a figure for that?
Yes.
I can't compare those two figures.
Yes, we can certainly give you a figure for those that go on more than 20 days. That's not a difficulty. I can provide you with that figure. The evidence shows that getting in early identification and providing an intervention at that stage means that you avoid the high levels of numbers into long-term absence. We are also developing the reporting to be able to effectively drill down and identify the reasons for those long-term absences, so not just the global figure, but the reasons behind that, to see if there is any particular patterns emerging that may or may not be particular to the teaching workforce. But certainly, Chair, I can provide you with that figure in relation to the number of long-term absences. It will be in the last digest that was placed in the Assembly last June, but I have no difficulty in getting that for you at all, certainly.
Joanne, before she left, referred to the number of people leaving the profession. I asked a relative of mine who happens to be a teacher in Birmingham about all this, and he reckons that the reason why the English long-term absence figures would be so low is because so many teachers actually resign and then come back as supply teachers. And he said this is a big thing over there at the moment. So they're not registered long-term sick. And it's stress related. You know that I think you refer to stress here. They give up the unequal struggle, but then come back as supply teachers where they can more easily regulate where and when they teach.
Well, certainly, in order to avoid that, that's why the focus has been on the flexible contracts and flexible working, because certainly individuals may have other things happening in their lives that impact on their working lives, and rather than lose that person either to sickness or to resignation, we're encouraging, the employing authorities are encouraging schools to look flexibly at how that could be addressed. And certainly our analysis shows that there are more and more teachers availing of those flexible contracts in order to avoid that very situation.
Fair enough. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Maeve?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you. I'll be brief. But just in relation to specifically the targets, I think, Laverne, you had mentioned about the 8.7 days, and that was per post and not for employee. But there's a specific target there now in relation to absence, of reducing that absence further to 5 days. I mean, I'm just thinking how realistic that is in relation to failing targets over the last number of years.
Sure. The figure of 8.7 is for the non-teaching. Okay. The figure of 5 is for the teaching workforce. Now, that's a figure that we have set back way, the PAC that Trevor referred to, that was for the teaching workforce, and that was a sequential target that over the intervening period, employing authorities have been encouraged to address that a certain percentage at a time.
But that has failed over the last.
We have not achieved that target as yet. You're absolutely correct.
But is it realistic, I suppose?
The issue when we had this discussion with the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the PAC at the time, certainly we contended that it perhaps wasn't a realistic target. We had concerns regarding the reporting of teacher absenteeism in England, and we were concerned that we weren't comparing like for like, and that Northern Ireland is a different situation to England, and we suggested that perhaps a target more akin to, say, a region in the north of England might be something that could be looked at. But the NIO and the PAC were very clear we had to have the target to reduce to the level of England, and therefore that's why we've used that target. We haven't achieved it, we recognise that, but we have, over those period of years, reduced year on year. With regards to the target for non-teaching, at this stage, the recommendation in the NIO report was not to set a target, was for the department in conjunction with the employing authorities. So we will do that based on the fact we now have that baseline. Rest assured, it will be a challenging and robust target, but I would caveat it by saying it will be a realistic target as well, in recognition that we're starting from a different start point than we were with the teaching workforce.
Okay, and the department will set that?
The department, in conjunction, we'll listen to what the Education Library Board suggest. We will also talk to NISRA and our statistician colleagues to come up with something that is going to be reasonable. It's probably likely, again, going to be a target that we would look at over a 5-year period and then sequentially set an individual year-on-year target to achieve that.
And finally, Chair, just in relation to the stress-related issues, certainly the Department would indicate that the teacher absence is largely not related to stress-related issues. Do we have a breakdown of how, what are the issues that are involved in absence?
That is the
that
piece
part
of work.
the work of the?
Well, it's the next piece of work that the teaching aspect of the Managing Attendance Forum is going to be looking at. So we're able to report on the level of those who are presenting as stress-related. And we can go into the system and extract information on other. What we're looking at is effectively something in the region of 18 different categories, that a number of categories behind that will filter through into those 18 categories to identify the different types of sickness. And currently we are looking at, let's see, it's number 10 I think in here. We're looking at, so for example, stress and other psychiatric illnesses is category 1. There's some 25 different categories behind that may be on someone's medical certificate that would feed into that category. And again, we have a category for blood disorders, and anything that would come in under anemia or septicemia or so forth will come in under that. So we hope to have a situation where we have around 18 categories that we'll be able to report on. We're not there yet. We're still in the process of doing that, filtering through to those 18.
And is that a similar pattern for non-teaching?
The same sort of work will be done. I mean, initially the focus for the non-teaching is actually establishing the baselines. Once we have done that and working towards, the target reduction, the next step in that process would be to look at the reasons behind the absences, both short-term and long-term, and building on what work has been done already for the teaching side of things, so that we can, learn from those experiences and take forward similar work.
Okay. The difficulty is we have one payroll system in the main for teachers. Easier to effectively corral all of this information into a filtering process, because you're dealing with 5 education and boards who then have a number of payrolls that they run. Bringing all of that information together is going to be a massive task. So we're not starting from the same starting point for the teaching and non-teaching, but we have the same ultimate aim at the end.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
What's the situation in regards to the department?
I can talk the department itself, within the department. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come in, Chair. The clerk had intimated when he had written to the department that the committee had a particular interest in how we provide for health and well-being for staff. And you will have seen from the audit report itself that mental health issues are the main cause of sickness absence right across the public sector. So in the civil service itself, 29% of all absences are for those reasons. If I give you maybe just a few figures for the year just ended, our provisional outturn figures indicate that we lost 9.7 working days for a full-time member of staff, and this means that we have actually missed the target which the Minister set this year, which was 8.3 days. Give some example then, so that's only an indication. The rich data is for the year before. So during 12-13, 360 of our staff, so if 650 on the books or around about that, 360 had no absences whatsoever, 55%. 38% of all working days lost were due to anxiety, stress, depression, etc. And almost half of those working days lost were related to issues outside of the workplace, and then the rest work-related stress. So it shows you how difficult this is to pin down and address. And sadly, 7.8% of all working days lost were due to illnesses like cancer and heart disorders. So clearly these are things that are affecting people throughout our organisation. So some examples of what we're doing about it. We have a number of intervention mechanisms. We have a welfare support service, so staff can avail of confidential help through personal issues or indeed work-related issues. There's a care call, free phone, where you can access and get advice. There's a really good campaign going on in the civil service at the moment called NICS Well, And Chair, if I may, I would commend the Hansard report which the DFP committee took, where Professor Adley from the Occupational Health Service actually gave a fairly good piece of evidence. That's dated the 2nd of April. And we have an occupational health service where we have doctors and nurses who can help assess people, give advice about how they get back to work. Where we have somebody who actually indicates that they're off with stress, we actually follow up straight away with a stress questionnaire so that we can actually get to the bottom of it if it is a work-related issue. And timing is accidentally, I assure you, but this afternoon we are actually launching in the Department of Education, with the Minister's support, a departmental wellbeing programme. And that's a series of initiatives that aim to promote good physical and emotional health and wellbeing. So it's been launched later this afternoon and then tomorrow in Waterside House. We're also looking wider. Okay, so I think, Chair, you had made the point that it's difficult to get your finger on the pulse of these things. We have a wider human resource strategy which is looking at a number of key areas. So leadership from managers, how you communicate and engage with people, how you manage their performance, organisation and workloads, have we got that right, attendance, health and wellbeing, and good employee and trade union relationships. So there's real evidence to support a correlation between high levels of employment engagement and lower levels of sick absence. So maybe, Chair, with your permission, if we could maybe just indicate the sorts of things that we're doing on the WELL programme. So it's cost us around about £10,000. So we believe it's good value for money. The aim is to promote physical and emotional health and wellbeing, and the activities we plan for 14-15 are working with Action Cancer, breast screening and general health checks, promotion of stress courses, so training how you manage stress, line manager's role, encourage uptake of the occupational lifestyle and physical activity assessment programme. That's where they put you on a treadmill and test how good you are and give you some feedback. Food and mood seminars, information sessions for staff on how to make dietary changes to improve their lifestyles, health check events, and then we promote other self-help initiatives. Okay, Cycle to Work scheme, we have a website. Step Out with DE, if any of the committee want to come along with this. We are actually promoting walking at lunchtime, and we'll provide you with a pedometer. And then From Couch to Care 5K, so this is a National Health Service initiative to promote running. Okay, within 9 weeks you should be able to run 5K.
There's a biblical verse that comes to mind. Can two walk together except to be agreed? So I think I'd maybe just opt for the cycling instead of the walking part. Maybe. But no, Barry, that is useful and gives us an overview. And maybe it would be helpful if the department could supply us information in relation to the policy that's being launched.
Yes, I really would like that opportunity, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I think that, again, it's an annual issue that keeps always reoccurring, and obviously the Audit Office does their work, and we'll have to now report back to the Finance and Personnel that they asked us to carry this piece of work. So thank you for the information. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. Okay, well, there's a number of issues just arising from that presentation. We can't make a decision on these because we're not in quorum. But in summary, we will respond to the Finance and Personnel Committee. We could ask for further information on the efficient discharge policy, on clarification, although I think from what Laverne said there is no 0-hour contracts, but just we'll get it clarified. A breakdown of the teacher absence in terms of clarity maybe in regards to the education bill, because if there is a bill coming, whatever it is, whether it's 1, 3, 5, 10, 12, 16, whatever it is, then we want maybe clarity. Will it include issues in relation to HR and the issues that were raised by Laverne about the different types of employment regimes that there is? Anything else? Composite absence strategy was another.
The department indicates they're producing it sometimes in 2014, so you might be interested in that.
Okay, thank you. Members, we can't take any decisions other than can we accept that we deal with correspondence as the sheet? No. Okay, well, I think then what we'll...
There's a thing to
Yes. Yes. There is now there's no committee next Wednesday, but there is an event which has been organised by the PTA, and it's the Northern Ireland Gold Star Awards presentation ceremony, and it will be held in the Lone Gallery. It's hosted by the Minister, and the event will commence at 2:30. It's expected to last for a couple of hours, and the special event will showcase the innovative projects undertaken by PTA associations throughout Northern Ireland in a number of categories, and the guests are expected to arrive from 2:30, and hopefully will be formally opened at 3:15. The finalists in each of the categories of those highlighted, well, there's Changing for Life, Parental Partnerships, Community Links, and there's another PTA of the Year, and PTA Volunteer of the Year. So certainly we can. I think PTA have sent this to all members. If not, we'll circulate it. Yes. Okay, members, if there's nothing else that we can't make a decision, then I think what we'll do is, because there's nothing that's in the minutes that really needs to be dealt with. We can put it on to the week after when we come back. Okay, so we'll bring this to a conclusion. Thank you, members. Thank you.
Again. Thank you. Thanks, members.
All right.
Thank you.
Happy campaigning.